Now that we have these styles for Hangman in place, let's go ahead and move on to the Notes application, which is a vastly more complex app. The Notes application has way more content on the page, and there are actually 2 pages that we are going to work with. So we're not going to be able to knock out the entire styling process in one video. It's going to take a couple of videos, but we will get started in this one. I'm going to kick things off by closing down all open files and collapsing all expanded directories, and we are going to switch over to the terminal and change up live server. I'm going to shut it down and rerun it, live server, this time using the notes-application directory. Once we do boot that up, we should be able to refresh the browser, and now we're brought back to a terrible looking version of that application. Now, there is one thing I want to talk about real quick. If I expand my tools and go to the developer tools, I can see that we are once again running into trouble with the wizard in service. So I am going to switch to the standalone file that I mentioned earlier in the course. If you forget, you can find that at links.mead.io/UUIDv4. If you head over to that link, it redirects you to another github.com page. Here, all we're going to do is copy all of the contents of that file. We're going to start from the very top at line 1, all the way to the bottom a couple of hundred lines later. I'm going to copy that code, and we'll just create a new file over in the Notes app directory. In here, I'm going to make a new folder called scripts, and then inside of scripts, I'll make a new file called uuidv4.js, and I'll paste all of that content inside of there. Now, not only are we going to move that file into the scripts directory, but we'll also move our other 3 scripts. So let's go ahead and drag all of those up. And now, before we do anything else, let's go ahead and adjust the file paths for these 3 and add this one into the mix. We're going to do that in index.html and inside of our edit file. I'll start over here in the root homepage. Down below, the first one is for the wizard in service. I am going to switch that up to /scripts/uuidv4.js. Then down below that, we have our script tag for notes functions. In this case, everything's fine. We just have to add /scripts/upfront to look in that directory where it now lives. And we'll copy that and do the exact same thing down below for Notes app. Over inside of the edit page, we're going to have to make some changes as well. Now, this page does not use the UUID library, so there's no need for that change. All we have to do is take the code we have, /scripts/ and add it up front for notes functions and notes edit. Now, if I go ahead and save the HTML page, things should at least be working. Over here, I can create a new note. I get redirected over to the note page. I can edit the text, go back home, and I can indeed see my changes being reflected. So now we're in a good place to actually get started with the styling. I'm going to take this second tab, which has our Hangman theme, and swap out the URL. This time around, we're headed over to links.mead.io/notes. This is where we can find the theme for the Notes application, and since we have more stuff to style, we're going to have way more style rules. Our previous file was about 50-something lines. If we go ahead and grab all the code for this one, we can see it's actually almost 200 lines, with a lot more class-based selectors. Let's go ahead and copy this theme to the clipboard, and over inside of Visual Studio Code, we're going to create a CSS file and actually load it in. Over in the Notes app directory, I'll make a new folder called styles. Then inside of the styles directory, we can add that new file, something along the lines of styles.css. Inside of here, all we're going to do is paste in our quite lengthy CSS file. Then we can go ahead and save it and correctly link it in. I'll start with index.html. In here, we're going to set up our link. The href for this one is going to be /styles/styles.css. Then we're also going to set up the relationship. In this case, it is indeed a style sheet. Awesome. We can take this exact same line, copy it to the clipboard, and use it as is over inside of edit.html as well. I'm going to paste that right inside of the head opening and closing tags. And before we continue on making any other changes to our markup, let's go ahead and see what happens if we visit it in the browser. Now this time around, we can clearly see that things are mostly the same, which means that we have a lot of class-based selectors. A lot of the rules aren't showing up here because we haven't modified the markup to actually use them. Though there are a few notable changes, one being the font family. We now have a cleaner sans serif font showing up as opposed to the previous one. So from here, what we're going to end up doing is actually using some of the classes defined in that style sheet. And we're going to start with this header area. We have our title and subtitle. We're going to show them in a nice colored bar and center them as opposed to having them on a white background sitting on the left-hand side of the screen, pushed right up against the edge. Now to do this, we're going to be making some changes to the structure. Right here, we have our H1 and our H2. We're going to bring those into the mix in just a moment. Before we do though, we are going to create a brand new div. Now we can use the Emmet shorthand to create a div, but we can actually also provide IDs and classes for the element that we're going to set up. If I want an ID, I use the # followed by the ID. If I want a class, I use the dot followed by the class, like I would for a selector. Here, we can create a div with the class of header. I then hit tab and it automatically creates that tag for us, which is a really handy feature. Now, header itself is what's going to set up that nice blue background color. If I add some content inside of it, like test content, and save things, over in the browser, we can see we are getting that blue bar showing up. The only problem is that the stuff inside of it really isn't centered. It's still pushed up against the left-hand side. There is one more class we're going to use on another wrapper div right inside of here. So right here, we'll remove text content. We're going to create another div. In this particular case, we're also going to be setting up a class container. I can hit tab, it generates that div, and now we can add some content inside of it. If I add test content again and save things, we can see that we're still in that blue bar, but now we are centered. Now we're not completely centered, but imagine we have a rectangle that's centered. The rectangle goes from about here to about here. That is where the website content is going to live. We're not going to put anything on the edges on either side of the page. Now we can view the classes for both of these over in styles.css. If I scroll up a little bit, we can try to find one of these two. We have button, we have drop down, input, actions. Right up here, we have both of them. So near the top around line 29 for container and 37 for header. The goal of container is to just set a fixed width and then center the content. And that is exactly what it does. The goal for header is to just set up the blue bar, give it a white text, which is what we see, and set up a little bit of spacing between the container and the container's content. Now we can actually take our H1 and our H2, cut them out of their current location, and paste them right inside of here. We're going to be adding some classes for both of these as well. If we save things in their current state, we can see that the text is a little big. That's kind of bold, not really a good look. There are a couple of classes we can apply to both of these to fix that. Let's go ahead and start with the H1. Right here, a brand new class. And the class we're going to be using for the H1 is called header __, that's 2 underscores, title. Now let's go ahead and do the exact same thing for H2 with a different class. That is class equals, in quotes, header __, in this case, subtitle. Now, if we go ahead and save the program with those classes in place, what do we get over inside of the browser? We get a nice big title with a smaller, slimmer subtitle, a much better look. It's important to note that there is no special significance in HTML, CSS, or JavaScript when it comes to these 2 underscore characters between header and title, or header and subtitle. If we actually view the selector over in styles.css, we can see it is a 1-to-1 match. The exact same characters over here are specified right here, which is exactly what we did for container and header. These two underscore characters are just part of a common naming convention inside of CSS. So much like we use camel casing for JavaScript variable names, what we have over here is just a naming convention. It has no special meaning in terms of how the language operates. It's just a way for us, the developer, to stay a bit more organized. I do want to take just a couple of seconds to talk about this naming convention so you can make sense of the characters we're typing. Over in styles.css, I'm going to paste a comment up at the top right here. And this comment just outlines the naming convention. The naming convention, called BEM or beam, stands for block element modifier, and it is a way of thinking about the various elements that make up your page. So in this case, we have blocks, elements, and modifiers, and I've included an example of a potential class name on the right-hand side. So a block is a high-level construct. I might use a block for a header, for example, a big container on the page. This is a block of content, and in the example of a home, I might call this a house. Next up is the element. An element is just a piece of a block. So for the header, we have a piece of the block called title and subtitle. For a house, I might have a piece of the house referred to as the kitchen. So here we have the original block name followed by two underscores to signify it's an element, followed by the element name. So in this case, we have house underscore underscore kitchen. For our markup, we had header underscore underscore title. Now, the last piece of the naming convention isn't something we've seen yet, but it is something we'll see in just a few moments. This is the modifier. I'll talk about the modifier when we actually use it. So for the moment, we have our header all set up, and we actually want to take the header over to the edit page as well. Currently, there is no header over there. All we're going to do is take the div and all of its content, move over to edit.html, and paste it in as the first thing inside of the body tag. When I do, what do we get? We get our header showing up exactly the same for the edit page and for the home page, which is a great first step. The next thing I want to focus on is what goes directly below our header. For the home page, that's going to be a little bar that contains our filter and our sort dropdown. For the edit page, it's going to be a little bar that contains the link to home as well as the last edited message. Let's go ahead and start setting this up for the home page, then we'll integrate it into the edit page as well. So over inside of index.html, that's all going to happen by putting this stuff, as you guessed it, inside of some divs where we add a few classes. Let's go ahead and kick things off right here by adding a new div. The div itself is going to have a class of actions, so I'll set up .actions. Now, if you're creating a div element, it's actually the default element, which means that we can scratch all of that, type .actions, hit tab, and it's automatically going to default to a div since it's such a common element to use. Now, there are other elements we can use for various pieces of our application. There's actually a header element we can use for the header, which functions very similar to a div. It just has clearer semantics. So we can switch this over to header and then leave this one down below as a regular div. Inside of here, what are we going to do? We're going to create a second div. So this one is going to have a class of actions underscore underscore container. So here we have an element of actions, and inside of here, we put our input and our select dropdown. Let's go ahead and copy both of those inside. I'm going to properly indent them. And then if we save index.html, we should see some changes to the styles in the browser. Now, this isn't everything we're going to change. We have set up the container. There's also classes for our individual input field and text dropdown. That is what's going to take these styles to the final level. We're going to do this by adding a class onto both input and select. For input, we can add a class. This class is going to be, as you might have guessed, input. And then down below for select, we're also going to add a class. And this class is going to be dropdown. Whoops, that is drop down spelled correctly. And if we set up both of these classes and save things, we can see that now we have a slightly more uniform set of styles. Now we have our action bar set up for the notes application, and it is still working. I can see that typing in a filter does indeed remove notes that don't match the filter. If we go over to the edit page though, we can see that there is no action bar. So we're going to go ahead and set one up over there. Over in edit.html, right below the closing div tag for the header, we're going to create another div with the class of actions. Then inside of there, we're going to create our action container. That is .actions__container. Then we're going to hit tab to create that div. Then we're going to go ahead and move the link right here inside of it. I'm going to cut it out from down below and paste it in up above. And then once we move the link and properly indent it, we're also going to move the span. The span is where we have our last edited text showing up. We want that to show up in this action bar up top. Now, if we go ahead and save things in their current state, we can see that we are getting all of the content inside of the action bar, but it's not styled in a way that's looking nice. Over inside of our filters list, we put all the filters up against the left-hand side. For our edit page, I actually want to put this second thing all the way across to the right-hand side. So I want a lot of space in between the two elements. There is a way to get this done. That is by adding another class onto this div. So right here, that's going to be actions__container, bear with me, 2 hyphens followed by the word spaced. If I go ahead and save the file in its current state, we can see that the edit page does indeed refresh. We have the home link on the left-hand side, and we have our last edited message on the right-hand side. That looks a whole lot better than what we had before. Now, what I want to talk about is exactly what this double hyphen indicates in the BEM naming convention. If we head over to styles.css and look at our little comment up above, we can see that under a modifier, we have house-condo. So there are a lot of different types of houses. They probably all share some attributes, but each version might want something a little bit different. I might have a condo, in which case I might not have my own roof. It might be the building's roof, or I might have a different type of house like a row home, in which case I am attached to neighbors on both sides. So we create a modifier by adding hyphen followed by some sort of name for the modifier. In this case, house condo gets the job done. Over here, we are creating a version of actions container that is spaced. So I have hyphen spaced to create a little space. Now, once again, there is no special sort of interpretation going on here. You can find these characters exactly as they're typed here over in the CSS file. If we scroll down a little bit, we get to container, then we get to header with the title and subtitle, which we already explored. Down below that, we have actions. On actions, we set a border. We also set up a little bit of spacing using the padding style, and we set up our background color, that light gray. Down below that, we have our actions container. That's what correctly centers things. And down below that, we have a variation on the actions container. These characters match up exactly with that class name I just highlighted in index.html. Excuse me, that was actually in edit.html. So there we go. We now have some of these styles in place for the Notes application. Clearly, we are not done yet, but we have made some good progress focused on the top portion of both pages. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and finish off these styles by styling the edit inputs over here and by styling our notes list over in the home page. I'm excited to get to all of that, so let's go ahead and jump right in to the next one.